The Shadow Locker. Everwood High School was like any other high school in America. Students rushing between classes, teachers trying to maintain order, lockers lining every hallway. But there was one locker everyone avoided, Locker 316. Located at the end of the East Wing, its number was faded and the metal looked warped and rusted. Whispers of curses and disappearances surrounded it, passed down from student to student like some dark tradition. No one dared to touch it, until today. 1. The Dare. It was a dreary Wednesday afternoon, the sky outside overcast and heavy with rain. The school hallways were emptying out as the final bell rang, but a group of 5 friends, Jenna, Tyler, Marcus, Natalie, and Casey, lingered behind in the East Wing. Casey, the most daring of the group, had a mischievous grin on his face. "Come on, guys," he said, glancing at the others. $100 says none of you have the guts to open it." Jenna, always one to rise to a challenge, shot him a defiant look. "You're on," she said, stepping forward. The rest of the group looked uneasy, but Jenna's confidence was contagious. They gathered around Locker 316. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to stretch and move on their own. The locker's metal surface was covered in deep scratches, and the air around it felt colder than the rest of the hallway. "Maybe we should just leave it," Marcus mumbled, his breath visible in the sudden chill. "Scared?" Casey taunted, pulling out his phone to film the dare. Jenna took a deep breath, reaching out to touch the locker. The moment her fingers brushed against the cold, rusted metal, a wave of icy cold spread through her hand and up her arm. She yanked her hand back, startled, and the locker emitted a low, deep groan that seemed to echo down the hall. "What the hell was that?" Natalie whispered, eyes wide. The sound of metal creaking filled the air, and the locker began to rattle violently as if something inside was struggling to get out. A cold, suffocating wind whipped down the corridor, and then it stopped. Everything was still. Jenna backed away, her heart pounding. "Okay, that's enough. Let's get out of here." As they turned to leave, Casey chuckled nervously. "You see? Nothing to it. Just some creepy old locker." But as he pocketed his phone, they all heard it, a faint whisper coming from inside the locker. 2. The first night. That night, Jenna lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't shake the feeling of that cold creeping into her bones. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Did anyone else hear that whisper?" it read. Jenna quickly replied, "Yeah, but it was probably just the wind, right?" "I don't think so," came the response. "I keep hearing it, in my room, in my head." A chill ran down Jenna's spine. She glanced at the clock. Midnight. She was about to put her phone down when a new message from Casey came through. A video. She opened it. It was the footage he had taken earlier that day of her reaching out to Locker 316. But the audio was wrong. Instead of the usual school noises, there was a soft, rhythmic whispering. She couldn't make out the words, but it seemed to be saying her name. Her heart thudded in her chest as she noticed something else. Just as she touched the locker, a dark shadow moved across the screen, moving toward Casey, unseen by him. Then the video abruptly cut out. She tried to call Casey, but it went straight to voicemail. She sent a flurry of texts, but there was no response. Jenna's anxiety only grew as she tossed and turned, the whisper from the video now stuck in her head. Cough 3. The disappearance. The next morning, Casey was missing. His parents had called the school. He hadn't come home. His friends gathered in the hallway, their faces pale with worry. "We have to go back to the locker," Jenna insisted, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong. I don't know what, but I think it's connected." The others hesitated, but eventually agreed. As they approached Locker 316, they noticed something different. It was covered in a thick, dark residue, like an oily mold spreading across the metal. The locker seemed to hum, vibrating slightly, as if something inside was alive. "Open it," Tyler whispered, though his voice shook. "We have to know." Jenna reached for the lock, her hands trembling. She turned the dial to random numbers, and with each turn the hum grew louder. Finally, with a click, the lock opened. She pulled the door open slowly, expecting to see nothing but an empty metal space. Instead, she saw darkness, an impenetrable, suffocating void. A cold wind rushed out, carrying with it the distant, terrified scream of Casey. "Casey!" Jenna shouted, her voice echoing down the corridor of blackness. She could see nothing inside, just endless dark. She turned back to her friends. "We have to go in." They stared at her in disbelief, but she knew they couldn't leave him. She grabbed a flashlight from her bag and took a deep breath. "I'm going. You can follow if you want." One by one, they followed her into the abyss. Tafor. Inside the darkness. The inside of the locker defied logic. What should have been a small, cramped space was an endless hallway. The air was damp, and the walls dripped with the same dark residue that covered the locker. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, and their flashlight beams barely penetrated the darkness. The temperature plummeted, and their breaths came out as white mist. "Casey!" Jenna called again, but only the whispers answered. Soft, rhythmic, unintelligible whispers filled the space around them. They grew louder with every step, merging into a chorus that seemed to chant their names, each voice tinged with a sense of malice. Suddenly, Natalie screamed, her flashlight catching a glimpse of a figure in the shadows, a girl in a tattered, old-fashioned school uniform, her face half in darkness, eyes glowing white. "Get out," the girl hissed. "He's coming." "Who's coming?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with fear. "Who are you?" "I was like you. I came in here once." She trailed off, her face contorting in fear. "He's always hungry." A deep growl reverberated through the hallway, shaking the very walls. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, skeletal being with elongated limbs and a face that seemed to shift and change, blending the features of every missing student who had ever crossed its path. It moved slowly, deliberately, its eyes burning with a hungry void. "The Keeper," Jenna whispered as the creature lunged toward them. "The Keeper's hunt." They ran. The darkness seemed to twist and warp around them, making every step feel like running through thick mud. The Keeper's footsteps were slow but thunderous, shaking the ground beneath them. It whispered their names, its voice a low rumble that resonated in their bones. Natalie tripped, her flashlight skittering away into the darkness. As the Keeper loomed over her, its shadowy hands reaching out. Jenna lunged forward and pulled her away just in time. "This way!" Tyler shouted, spotting a faint light ahead. They stumbled into a small room, a warped version of the school's gymnasium. The walls dripped with darkness, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. They could hear the whispers louder now, filling their heads, clouding their thoughts. "We can't outrun it," Jenna said, panic rising in her chest. "We have to face it." "But how?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling. "It's a monster!" Jenna remembered the girl's words. "He's always hungry." She looked around, seeing the faint images of past students flickering in and out on the walls. "It feeds on fear," she realized. "We have to stand together. We can't be afraid." They formed a circle, linking hands, and closed their eyes, focusing on their memories, happy moments, laughter, friendship. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, but they held on. The Keeper howled, its body twisting and contorting in rage. It charged at them, but as it neared, it hit an invisible barrier of their shared courage and friendship. The darkness around it began to crack and splinter. With a final, ear-splitting scream, the Keeper shattered into 1,000 shards of shadow, dissolving into nothingness. 6. The Return. They found themselves back in the hallway of Everwood High, standing before locker 316. The locker door was shut, the dark residue gone. There was no sign of Casey. Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. "Hey guys, what are you doing?" They turned around to see Casey standing there, looking confused but unharmed. "Casey!" Jenna cried, rushing to hug him. "What happened?" he asked, bewildered. "I don't remember anything after filming the locker yesterday." The others exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what had happened, but how could they explain it? As they left the East Wing, Jenna glanced back one last time at locker 316. It stood there, quiet, ordinary, but she knew better. The whispers were gone, but she had a feeling.